The sun was dipping behind the tall buildings, painting the streets in gold and shadow. It was the kind of quiet evening when the city felt almost calm, the rush hour traffic finally thinning. 17-year-old Jaylen Carter was on his way home from basketball practice, his gym bag slung over his shoulder. He moved through the familiar streets with his headphones in, thinking only about homework and what his mom might cook for dinner. But as he crossed the intersection near a small convenience store, a police cruiser slowly rolled up beside him. "Hey, you there!" Jaylen paused, pulling out one earbud. Two officers stepped out. One of them, Officer Reynolds, was tall and broad-shouldered, with a look that carried more suspicion than curiosity. His partner hung back silently, watching. "What are you doing out here?" Reynolds asked, his tone sharp. Jaylen blinked, confused. "I'm just heading home." "Heading home?" Reynolds sneered. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir. Just a few blocks away." Reynolds looked him up and down as if every answer was a lie. "Got any ID?" Jaylen reached slowly into his pocket for his wallet, his hands trembling slightly. "Yeah, it's right." "Hands where I can see them!" Reynolds barked suddenly, stepping closer. Jaylen froze, his heart pounding. "I was just... Don't move!" Before Jaylen could even process what was happening, Reynolds grabbed his arm roughly, yanking him forward. Jaylen stumbled, dropping his bag. "I didn't do anything," Jaylen said, his voice breaking. Reynolds shoved a foot purge against the side of the cruiser. "Don't play smart with me. We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. You fit the description." "What description?" Jaylen gasped. His cheek pressed against the cold metal. Reynolds didn't answer. He twisted Jaylen's arm behind his back, ignoring his protests. The second officer shifted uneasily, but didn't intervene. "Please," Jaylen's voice cracked. "I'm just trying to get home." But Reynolds wasn't listening. He pushed the teen harder against the car, his anger rising without reason. A small crowd began to gather at the corner, whispering. Someone pulled out a phone to record. Jaylen's eyes filled with tears, not just from pain, but from the humiliation. He had done nothing wrong. Nothing. And then the moment turned even darker. Reynolds struck Jaylen in the side with his elbow, sending a jolt of pain through his ribs. Jaylen gasped, unable to catch his breath. "Stop resisting!" Reynolds shouted, even though Jaylen hadn't resisted at all. From across the street, a car screeched to a halt. The door flew open, and a woman in a dark suit stepped out, moving quickly toward the scene. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Get your hands off my son!" Everyone turned. Reynolds hesitated, still holding Jaylen against the cruiser. The woman's face was calm, but her eyes burned with a quiet fury. She reached into her jacket and flashed a badge, FBI Special Agent Carter. "I said," she repeated, her voice deadly calm, "let him go." For a moment, the street froze. The murmurs from the small crowd fell silent as everyone stared at the woman standing just a few feet away. She moved with quiet authority, the kind that didn't need shouting. Officer Reynolds blinked, still gripping Jaylen's arm. "Excuse me? Who the hell are you?" The woman stepped closer, her badge glinting under the fading sunlight. "Special Agent Olivia Carter, FBI." Her voice was calm, controlled, but each word carried the weight of command. Reynolds' hand faltered slightly on Jaylen's arm. "FBI?" "Yes," she said sharply. "And the boy you're assaulting is my son." The second officer shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Reynolds and Agent Carter. The crowd began whispering again, phones still recording every second. Reynolds tried to recover his composure. "Ma'am, I—" "Let him go," Olivia interrupted, her voice dropping an octave lower. For a split second, Reynolds hesitated as if his ego was still deciding whether to comply. But one look at Olivia's eyes, cold, piercing, unwavering, made him loosen his grip. Jaylen stumbled back, clutching his arm, gasping for air. Olivia immediately moved to him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Are you hurt?" she asked softly, her tone changing in an instant, protective now. Jaylen nodded, still shaken. "I'm okay, I think." Olivia turned back to Reynolds, her face hardening again. "You have exactly 30 seconds to explain to me why you thought it was acceptable to attack an unarmed minor who was doing absolutely nothing." Reynolds stammered. There were reports of suspicious activity." He matched the description. "What description?" Olivia's voice sliced through his excuse. "Walking home with a gym bag? Wearing sneakers? Being black?" Reynolds opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You didn't even ask a real question," Olivia continued, stepping closer until she was face to face with him. "You saw a boy, decided he didn't belong, and used your badge as a weapon. And now you're going to answer for it." The second officer finally spoke, his voice low. "Ma'am, maybe we should—" "You should call your sergeant," Olivia snapped, her eyes still locked on Reynolds. "Right now." The younger officer pulled out his radio with shaky hands. The crowd, now larger, began murmuring louder. One person whispered, "She's FBI?" Another said, "Oh, he's done for." Reynolds glanced nervously at the cameras pointed at him. His bravado had completely drained away. Olivia crouched down to Jaylen's level again, gently brushing the dirt from his shirt. "It's okay. I'm here now," she said softly. Jaylen's voice was quiet but steady. "Mom, I didn't do anything. I was just walking home." "I know, baby. I know." When she stood again, Olivia's entire presence shifted back into the controlled fury of a federal agent. "You're going to call your sergeant," she repeated to Reynolds, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You're going to write a full report, and then you're going to explain to Internal Affairs why you thought you could lie your way out of a beating in front of witnesses and multiple cameras." Reynolds looked like he wanted to protest, but one glance at the crowd, and the phones still recording, told him it was useless. In the distance, the sound of another patrol car approaching grew louder. Backup had arrived. But this time, it wasn't for Reynolds. It was for the truth. The second patrol car screeched to a stop at the curb, lights flashing red and blue against the darkening sky. Two officers stepped out, one of them a sergeant with years of experience written all over his face. He scanned the scene quickly, taking in the tense crowd, the phones recording, the teenager clutching his arm, and Officer Reynolds standing pale and stiff. "What's going on here?" the sergeant demanded, his voice sharp but controlled. Olivia turned toward him with calm precision. "What's going on?" she said, holding her badge up to his eye level, "is that your officer here just assaulted my son without cause. I'm Special Agent Olivia Carter, FBI." The sergeant froze for half a second, processing the badge in front of him. "Agent Carter?" "Yes, and right now, you need to decide how you want to handle this, because the entire thing is on video, and every second of it shows your officer violating a minor's rights." The sergeant's eyes flicked to Reynolds, who shifted uncomfortably. "Is this true?" Reynolds' mouth opened, but no sound came out. She's overreacting," he muttered. The crowd erupted in murmurs. One voice shouted, "It's on video. We all saw it." Another yelled, "He didn't do anything." The sergeant turned to the second officer, the one who had been silent during the entire incident. "Officer Mills, what happened?" Mills hesitated, glancing nervously at Olivia, at Jaylen, and then at the watching crowd. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but subdued. The kid wasn't resisting. He was just walking home. Reynolds escalated it. The sergeant's jaw tightened. "Reynolds, step away from the cruiser." Reynolds glared at Mills, but obeyed, his face red with shame and frustration. "I was doing my job," he muttered weakly. Olivia's eyes sharpened. "No, you were abusing your badge. And now, you're going to face the consequences." Jaylen stood quietly by his mother's side, his breath finally steadying. The sergeant crouched slightly to his level. "Son, are you hurt?" Jaylen hesitated, glancing at his mom. "Just sore. He grabbed me really hard. I didn't do anything." Olivia spoke up. "He didn't. There was no reasonable suspicion, no probable cause. This was profiling, plain and simple." The sergeant straightened, his expression dark. "Agent Carter, I assure you this will be documented fully. Officer Reynolds will be removed from duty pending review." Removed from duty? Olivia's voice stayed calm, but the steel in it was undeniable. "No, he'll be facing more than just a review. I'll be filing a formal complaint with your Internal Affairs Division and forwarding all evidence directly to the U.S. Attorney's Office. You're not sweeping this under the rug." The crowd murmured louder, emboldened. Some began chanting softly, "Accountability! Accountability!" Reynolds's confidence cracked completely. "This isn't necessary," he blurted. You didn't mean to get caught." Olivia cut him off sharply. "But you did, and now you're going to answer for it." The sergeant signaled to another officer. "Take his weapon, secure it. Reynolds, you're relieved of duty effective immediately." As the other officer carefully removed Reynolds's firearm and badge, the crowd pulled out more phones to capture the moment. Olivia gently guided Jaylen toward her car, away from the flashing lights and noise. She leaned down to him, her voice soft now. "It's okay, I've got you." Jaylen looked up at her, still shaken. "I didn't think anyone would believe me." Olivia brushed his hair back gently. "That's why I'm here, and I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." Behind them, Reynolds was being led away, his head down, his uniform suddenly feeling like a weight he couldn't carry anymore. And for the first time that evening, the crowd's whispers turned into silence. Not out of fear, but because justice, even in this small moment, was finally visible. At the station later that evening, the atmosphere was tense. The news of what happened on the street had already reached the watch commander, and by the time the patrol cars pulled into the lot, a small crowd of reporters had gathered outside. Word had spread faster than anyone expected. An FBI agent's son assaulted by a local cop wasn't a story that could be contained. Inside, the sergeant escorted Reynolds through the back entrance. His weapon and badge had already been confiscated. The room fell silent as other officers watched him walk down the corridor. No one offered him support. Even the ones who used to laugh at his jokes and share his arrogance stayed quiet, their faces unreadable. Reynolds muttered under his breath, "This is being blown out of proportion." But his words trailed off when he saw the internal affairs officers waiting in the interview room. Meanwhile, Olivia sat with Jaylen in a quiet corner of the station lobby. She had insisted on accompanying her son personally to ensure his statement was documented. Jaylen was still shaken, his hand clutching a bottle of water she'd given him. "Mom," he whispered, "why did he do that? I didn't even say anything to him." Olivia looked at her son, her heart breaking at the confusion in his eyes. "Because some people let their power make them blind, Jay. But he's not getting away with it. Not this time." A lieutenant approached carefully. "Agent Carter, if you and your son are ready, we can take your statements now." Olivia stood, her posture composed but unmistakably firm. "We're ready, and I want everything on record, the video, the witnesses, everything." Jaylen recounted the entire incident with Olivia by his side, her hand resting gently on his back for reassurance. His voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as he spoke. "Yes, sir. I was just walking home from basketball practice. I didn't do anything wrong. He told me to put my hands up, and I did. Then he grabbed me, and he hit me. I wasn't resisting, I swear." The lieutenant nodded, typing carefully. "We have multiple civilian videos corroborating this. Internal Affairs is already opening a full investigation." Meanwhile, in another room, Reynolds sat under harsh fluorescent lights, staring at the table. An Internal Affairs officer pressed record on a camera. "Officer Reynolds, do you understand why you're here?" Reynolds scoffed weakly. "I was just doing my job. The kid looked suspicious." "Suspicious?" the investigator interrupted. "For walking home with a gym bag? Because that's all the video shows. Do you realize the gravity of what you've done? This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an unprovoked assault on a minor." Reynolds' face flushed red. He glanced toward the door, but there was no escape. Back in the lobby, Olivia finished signing the statement. She turned to the Khatsal lieutenant. "I expect full transparency. If this department thinks it can sweep this under the rug, I assure you, the Bureau will not let it happen." The lieutenant raised his hand slightly. "Agent Carter, this will be handled properly. Reynolds will face full suspension pending investigation. And with your evidence, it's likely he'll lose his badge." Olivia nodded once. "Good, because what he did isn't just misconduct, it's a crime." As they left the station, Jaylen leaned against his mother. "Are they really going to do something about it?" She squeezed his shoulder gently. "They will, and if they don't, I will." Outside, the reporters waiting at the curb immediately turned their cameras toward them. Flashes lit up the night as questions rang out. "Agent Carter, is it true your son was the victim of police brutality? Do you plan to press charges against Officer Reynolds?" Olivia didn't stop walking. "You'll get your answers in due time," she said firmly, guiding Jaylen past the crowd and into her car. Behind them, in the cold fluorescent light of the station, Reynolds sat alone as his world began to unravel piece by piece. And for the first time, he realized the badge he had always hidden behind couldn't protect him from the truth. By the next morning, the story had spread like wildfire. News channels ran continuous footage from the bystanders' recordings, clips of Officer Reynolds shoving Jaylen against the cruiser played side by side with stills of Olivia holding her FBI badge. Headlines screamed, "FBI agent confronts cop who assaulted her son. Caught on camera. Teen beaten. Mom reveals she's federal agent." The city woke up buzzing with outrage. Social media erupted. Hashtags demanding accountability trended nationally within hours. At the precinct, the atmosphere was heavy. Officers gathered in hushed groups, staring at their phones. No one defended Reynolds now. The chief called an emergency meeting. his voice sharp with controlled anger. "This department is already under scrutiny," he said, "and now one of our own has handed the public another reason to distrust us. Internal Affairs will handle Reynolds, but make no mistake, every eye is on this precinct now." Meanwhile, Olivia sat at her kitchen table with Jaylen, gently applying an ice pack to his ribs. He winced slightly, but stayed quiet. "You're going to be okay," Olivia said softly. Jaylen looked down. "It still doesn't make sense. I wasn't doing anything, Mom. Why did he pick me?" Olivia hesitated, her heart heavy. "Because some people let their ignorance guide them. But that doesn't define you. What defines you is how you rise after moments like this." Jaylen nodded slowly, but the hurt in his eyes lingered. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was a family friend, also an attorney, bringing legal paperwork. "They're already contacting the department," he said, "and the media's demanding an official statement. You have the full support of the community behind you." Olivia nodded. "We're not here for media noise. We're here for justice. Reynolds won't just be suspended. He's going to face charges." Across town, Reynolds sat in a stark internal affairs office. He'd been officially stripped of his badge and placed on unpaid leave. A camera recorded his interview as the investigator laid out the evidence. "Officer Reynolds," the investigator said coldly, "you've been accused of excessive force, racial profiling, and falsifying your report. There are multiple videos from bystanders and testimony from the victim. Do you understand the severity of these charges?" Reynolds stared at the table. "I didn't know who he was," he muttered. The investigator's eyes narrowed. "So if he hadn't been an FBI agent's son, would you have gotten away with it?" Reynolds had no answer. Meanwhile, outside the FBI field office, reporters gathered, waiting for Olivia's formal statement. She stood before the cameras, composed and resolute. "This isn't just about my son," she said. "This is about every parent who fears their child will be judged not for what they've done, but for how they look. Accountability isn't optional. It's necessary, and it's coming." Her words struck like a hammer. The press conference aired live, replayed across national networks. Community leaders praised her courage, while activists demanded the department fire Reynolds immediately. Back at home, Jaylen watched the broadcast quietly. "You didn't even sound angry," he said. Olivia looked at him gently. "Anger can fade. The truth doesn't. That's why I let it speak for itself." As night fell, the precinct braced for protests outside. Candles were already being lit on the courthouse steps, signs demanding justice for Jaylen held high by neighbors and strangers alike. And somewhere inside his empty apartment, Reynolds sat alone, watching the news cycle tear apart the life he'd built on a false sense of power. For the first time, he realized the worst part wasn't losing his badge. It was knowing that the entire world could now see him for what he truly was. Meanwhile, Olivia tucked Jaylen into bed, her resolve solidifying like steel. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more scrutiny, but also more truth. Because when the truth finally comes into the light, no badge is strong enough to hide behind. By the next evening, the courthouse steps were flooded with people. Community members gathered with signs reading "Justice for Jaylen" and "End Abuse of Power." Candles flickered in the cool night air, casting soft glows on determined faces. Reporters set up live broadcasts, capturing the growing movement. Olivia stood at the edge of the crowd, watching silently. She hadn't organized the protest, but she understood the pain fueling it. She placed a protective hand on Jaylen's shoulder. "This isn't just about you anymore," she told him softly. It's about everyone who's been through what you just experienced. Jaylen looked at the crowd, his eyes wide. They're all here. For me? They're here because what happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone, Olivia said gently. Meanwhile, inside the precinct, the chief met with internal affairs officers and legal advisors. The department was in damage control mode, but even they knew there was no salvaging Reynolds' career. He's done, the chief said bluntly. There's no defending what's on those videos. He's not only suspended, he'll be terminated, and the DA is moving forward with charges for assault and falsifying reports. In a cramped office down the hall, Reynolds sat alone, waiting for his final meeting. His hands fidgeted nervously, his once confident demeanor completely gone. When the internal affairs investigator entered, there was no sympathy in his voice. Officer Reynolds, you are officially terminated from this department effective immediately, the investigator said. Your actions violated department policy, state law, and basic human decency. You'll be receiving notice of your arraignment within the week. Reynolds tried to speak. I didn't mean. You didn't mean what? To get caught? The investigator cut him off sharply. Save it for court. Across the city, Olivia sat with Jaylen in their living room, scrolling through countless messages of support from strangers. Friends, neighbors, and even people from other states were reaching out. Some shared their own stories of profiling and fear. See this? Olivia said, showing Jaylen a message from a mother in another city. Your story is giving people courage to speak out. Jaylen managed a small smile. I just wanted to walk home. I didn't think it would turn into all this. That's the problem, Olivia replied softly. Something so simple should never be dangerous. And we're going to keep fighting until it isn't. The next day, Olivia was called to speak at a press conference alongside the mayor and community leaders. Standing at the podium, she remained calm, her voice steady, but full of weight. This case isn't an isolated incident, she said. It's part of a larger issue, a pattern that too many families know too well. My son survived, but many don't. This city has to do better, and it starts with holding Officer Reynolds fully accountable. Her words drew applause from the crowd and nods from city officials. Meanwhile, Reynolds walked through his neighborhood, head down. The whispers followed him. That's him, the cop who beat that kid. Yeah, his mom was FBI. He didn't see that coming. For the first time, Reynolds felt the sting of being judged instantly, without defense, without compassion. It was a mirror of the very treatment he'd given others. Later that night, Olivia tucked Jaylen in. He looked up at her quietly. Mom, are you still mad? He asked. I'm not mad, Olivia said, brushing his hair back gently. I'm focused. There's a difference. Anger fades. But focus changes things. Across town, Reynolds sat in his dark apartment, staring at the letter that confirmed his termination. It was official. His badge, his authority, his illusion of untouchability, all gone. And for the first time, he understood what real accountability felt like. Because the truth doesn't just strip away lies. It dismantles the false power they're built on. Within days, the district attorney's office announced formal charges against Reynolds: assault, misconduct, and filing a false police report. The press conference was brief, but impactful. No one is above the law, the DA said firmly. This officer's actions violated public trust and the rights of an innocent teenager. We will pursue this case to the fullest extent. The footage of Reynolds, Striking Jaylen played again on the evening news, paired with Olivia's calm but powerful statement from the night before. Viewers across the city watched, many nodding in silent agreement that justice, at least this time, was finally moving in the right direction. At home, Jaylen sat down on the couch with Olivia, still processing it all. So, he's really going to court? Like for what he did to me? Olivia nodded. Yes. And you won't have to stand alone. I'll be right there with you when you give your statement. Jaylen hesitated. I don't know if I want to see him again. You don't have to be afraid, Olivia reassured him. The truth is already on your side. Meanwhile, Reynolds met with his attorney in a small, dim office. His lawyer didn't sugarcoat anything. The evidence is overwhelming, the attorney said. Multiple video angles, eyewitness accounts, and the victim's mother is an FBI agent. You're not walking away from this clean. The best we can do is negotiate a plea deal. Reynolds clenched his fists. I didn't know who the kid was. The attorney sighed. And that's the problem. You didn't care who he was. You saw him as a target. And now the whole city sees you for what you really are. At the police precinct, the fallout deepened. Officers attended mandatory meetings about use of force and bias training. The chief spoke sternly to his staff. Reynolds didn't just ruin his own career, the chief said. He damaged this entire department. If you think you can treat people like that without consequence, think again. From now on, everything you do will be reviewed, because the public isn't blind anymore. In the community, protests turned into organized town halls. Residents demanded stronger oversight, and for the first time, city officials listened. New policies were drafted. Body cam footage would be released faster. Officers would be rotated to prevent power imbalances in certain neighborhoods, and civilian review boards would have real authority. At one of these town halls, Olivia sat quietly among the crowd with Jaylen beside her. A local community leader pointed her out. This is Agent Carter, he said. She stood up not just for her son, but for all of us. Let's thank her. People clapped softly, but Olivia simply shook her head. I didn't do anything special, she said. I just did what any parent would do. Protect their child. But we shouldn't need badges or titles to get justice. It should be for everyone. Jaylen squeezed her hand, a small smile forming on his face. Meanwhile, Reynolds' world continued to shrink. His face was plastered across newspapers with words like disgraced and former officer charged. Old friends stopped answering his calls. Even his family kept their distance, tired of the constant spotlight of shame. Late that night, Reynolds sat in his dark apartment, staring at the badge he had been forced to turn in. It wasn't just metal anymore. It was a reminder of how quickly arrogance and abuse could destroy everything. Across the city, Olivia tucked Jaylen into bed. He looked at her and asked softly, Will it ever stop happening, Mom? To kids like me? Olivia kissed his forehead gently. It won't stop. Overnight. But this is a start. And we'll keep fighting until it does. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive all at once. It starts as a spark, then spreads until even the darkest corners are forced into the light. The morning of Reynolds' arraignment, the courthouse plaza was already crowded. Protesters held signs demanding justice, while reporters clustered near the entrance, their cameras ready. The once unknown name, Jaylen Carter, had become a rallying cry across the city. Olivia arrived with Jaylen, walking steadily past the cameras, Jaylen clutched her hand, nervous but determined. He could hear the murmurs from the crowd. That's him, the boy from the video. And that's his mom, the FBI agent. Olivia leaned down slightly as they climbed the courthouse steps. You don't have to be afraid. This is just another step toward the truth. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reynolds sat at the defense table in a plain suit, stripped of his uniform and any semblance of authority. He avoided looking at Jaylen, who sat beside Olivia in the gallery. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Officer Reynolds, the judge began, her tone stern, you are charged with second-degree assault, misconduct in public office, and filing a false report. How do you plead? Reynolds' attorney nudged him gently. He cleared his throat. Guilty, Your Honor. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Jaylen blinked in surprise. Even Olivia raised an eyebrow slightly. They had expected a fight, excuses, denials. But this? The judge nodded. Very well. Sentencing will be scheduled for next month. Until then, Mr. Reynolds, you are remanded to house arrest and will surrender your passport. Court is adjourned. As the gavel struck, Jaylen let out a quiet breath he didn't know he was holding. Outside the courthouse, microphones and cameras swarmed Olivia. Agent Carter, how do you feel about the guilty plea? Do you think justice is finally being served? Olivia kept her composure. This was never about who my son's mother is. It's about holding people accountable when they abuse power. One guilty plea doesn't erase the pain he caused, but it's a step in the right direction. She guided Jaylen through the crowd, ignoring the shouted questions. Meanwhile, at the precinct, officers watched the live coverage on a small TV in the break room. Some shook their heads in quiet disbelief. He pled guilty, one officer muttered. He didn't have a choice, another replied. The evidence was bulletproof. For the newer recruits, it was a sobering lesson that the badge wasn't a shield for wrongdoing. Across town, Reynolds returned to his empty apartment under the watch of an escorting officer. The media vans outside followed him all the way back. He shut the blinds immediately, sinking into a chair. His phone buzzed with unread messages. Old acquaintances cutting ties, former friends telling him to face what you did. For the first time, Reynolds felt the full weight of his choices. There was no department to protect him, no union to shield him. Just silence. Later that evening, Olivia and Jaylen sat at their kitchen table. Jaylen poked at his dinner absent-mindedly. Mom, does this mean it's over? He asked softly. Olivia shook her head gently. It's not over? Not yet. But today proved something important. You were heard, and the whole city saw what happened. Jaylen nodded slowly. It still hurts, not just here. He touched his ribs. But here too, he added, pointing to his chest. Olivia reached over, holding his hand. That will take time, but you're stronger than this moment, and you're not alone. Across the city, the courthouse steps were still lit by flickering candles from supporters who refused to let the story fade. Because this wasn't just one boy's fight anymore, it was the beginning of something bigger, a demand for a different kind of future. In the days following the guilty plea, the city continued to hum with conversation. Community forums filled with residents demanding stronger protections. Editorials called for sweeping reform. Jaylen's name became part of a broader movement, not just a victim, but a reminder of how easily power could turn into harm. At school, Jaylen returned quietly, His classmates whispered, some offering supportive nods, others simply staring. A few approached him after class. "Hey," one of them said, "what happened to you? It wasn't right. I'm glad you're okay." Jaylen managed a small smile. "Thanks." But he still felt the weight of it all. Nights were the hardest, lying awake replaying the moment Reynolds grabbed him, the fear that froze his body, the shame of being treated like he didn't matter. Olivia noticed. She found him one night, sitting by his window, staring out into the dark. "You couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. Jaylen shook his head. "It just keeps coming back. I keep thinking, what if you hadn't been there? What if no one saw it?" Olivia sat beside him. "That's why we're making sure this doesn't get buried. That's why we keep pushing for change. You're not just surviving this, you're helping to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else." Meanwhile, Reynolds' fall from grace deepened. His neighbors avoided him. Former colleagues erased his number. Even the local paper published an expose on his history of complaints that had been quietly ignored. It painted a picture of a man who had been arrogant for years, shielded by silence, until the wrong victim, the right victim, finally exposed him. In his apartment, Reynolds scrolled through the articles with a blank stare. The words "pattern of misconduct" burned on the screen. He wanted to shut it all out, but the truth had nowhere left to hide. At the police department, the chief announced new measures in a tense press briefing. Effective immediately, all officers will undergo expanded bias and de-escalation training, the chief said. A civilian oversight committee will be granted full authority to review incidents of misconduct. We can't undo the past, but we can and must do better moving forward. The crowd of reporters pressed for answers about Reynolds, but the chief stayed firm. He pled guilty. "The system is working now. Let it finish." Across town, Olivia was invited to speak at a local community center. She didn't want the focus to remain only on her son, but on the bigger picture. "This isn't about special treatment because I'm an FBI agent," she told the crowd. "It's about making sure no child has to fear walking home. Jaylen had me there to protect him. But what about the kids who don't? That's why we can't stop here." The room erupted in quiet applause. People nodded, some with tears in their eyes. After the meeting, an older woman approached Olivia. "My grandson went through something like this years ago," she said. "No one believed us. Thank you for standing up. You've given us hope again." Meanwhile, Jaylen began to slowly heal. Therapy sessions helped him find words for the fear he had carried. At one session, he told the counselor, "I just want to feel normal again, like this didn't change everything about me." "It won't define you," the counselor assured him. "It's part of your story, but it's not all of your story." As the sentencing date approached, the city braced for what would come next. Supporters planned to be at the courthouse, demanding a punishment that matched the harm done. And in his apartment, Reynolds sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at the notice for his sentencing hearing. His world had grown impossibly small. Across the city, Olivia tucked Jaylen in again, her voice calm but firm. "No matter what happens next, remember, you didn't deserve this. And you're not broken. You're stronger than he ever was." Because the truth was no longer just his pain. It had become a call for change that couldn't be ignored. The day of sentencing arrived with an air of quiet anticipation. The courthouse steps were filled with people holding candles and signs that read, Justice for Jaylen, and accountability has no exceptions. Media vans lined the street, their cameras fixed on the entrance. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Jaylen sat beside Olivia, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He felt a strange mix of anxiety and calm, an odd stillness knowing that whatever happened today, the truth had already been revealed. Reynolds entered quietly, escorted by his attorney. Gone was the posture of a man who believed he was untouchable. His suit hung awkwardly on him, his eyes cast toward the floor. He didn't dare glance at the gallery where Jaylen and Olivia sat. When the judge entered, the murmurs stopped instantly. This court is here today to deliver sentencing for former Officer Thomas Reynolds, she began, her tone firm but measured. You have pled guilty to charges of second-degree assault, misconduct, and falsifying a police report. Before I deliver the sentence, does the victim's family wish to speak? Olivia stood, her heels clicking softly on the floor as she approached the podium. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. My son was walking home, she began, her tone steady, but carrying weight. He was doing nothing wrong. But because of one man's arrogance, one man's prejudice, he was treated like a criminal. My son is lucky. He came home that night. Many others don't. She turned briefly toward Reynolds. You didn't just hurt my child physically. You hurt his sense of safety, his trust in the people sworn to protect him. And for that, you must be held accountable, not just for him, but for everyone who can't stand here today. Olivia stepped back, placing a gentle hand on Jaylen's shoulder as she returned to her seat. The judge nodded, her expression serious. Thank you, Agent Carter. Reynolds' attorney whispered for him to say something, but Reynolds stayed silent. Perhaps he knew there was nothing he could say that would undo what he'd done. The judge continued, Mr. Reynolds, you abused the power entrusted to you. You not only harmed a child physically, but undermined the very trust the public must have in law enforcement. For these reasons, you are sentenced to 2 years in state custody with an additional 5 years probation. You will also be permanently barred from serving in any law enforcement capacity. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Some felt it wasn't enough. Others felt it was finally something. Reynolds lowered his head as the bailiff placed a hand on his shoulder. His attorney tried to speak quietly to him, but it didn't matter. He was escorted out of the courtroom, his steps heavy, his future sealed. Jaylen exhaled slowly, almost in disbelief. It's over? He whispered. Olivia nodded softly. This part is over, but the work isn't. Outside, the crowd erupted in mixed emotions, some cheering, some still demanding more systemic change. Reporters rushed forward as Olivia and Jaylen exited the building. Agent Carter, do you feel justice was served? One shouted. Olivia paused briefly, looking straight into the cameras. Justice is a journey, not a single moment. Today was a step, but there's still a long way to go for real change. She guided Jaylen through the crowd, past the cameras, past the noise, to a quieter street where their car waited. In the distance, Reynolds was driven away in a transport van. The badge he once hid behind, now just a memory he'd rather forget. And as Jaylen sat in the car beside his mother, he looked out at the city, still hurting, still healing. But he felt something new, relief. Because even though the scars would remain, the truth had won. And for the first time since that night, he believed things could get better. In the days after the sentencing, the city seemed to breathe differently. For some, it felt like justice had finally pierced through the cracks. For others, it was only a small victory in a much larger fight. But no one could deny that the case had changed something. Local news stations covered the outcome nonstop. Panel discussions debated the sentencing. Some called it fair. Others said it was far too light. Community leaders took to the airwaves, demanding that the case not be treated as an isolated incident. At Jaylen's school, things felt different too. Classmates who once stayed silent now came up to him with quiet words of support. "Hey, I'm glad you're okay," one student said after class. "What happened to you? It made a lot of us think." Jaylen nodded, still unsure how to respond. The attention was strange, but part of him felt stronger now, like his story meant something beyond just his pain. At home, Olivia worked late into the night, responding to messages from civil rights organizations and community groups who wanted her help pushing for deeper reform. But she never let it take away from the time she spent with Jaylen. One evening, she found him at the kitchen table, sketching in a notebook. "What are you working on?" she asked gently. Jaylen shrugged. "Just drawing, trying to think about other things." She smiled and kissed the top of his head. "That's good. Healing takes time. But remember, you didn't do anything wrong. Don't let one man's hate change the way you see yourself." Meanwhile, inside the precinct, changes were already underway. The chief brought in external consultants for mandatory training sessions. Officers who had ignored complaints in the past were warned that silence would no longer protect them. A new civilian review board was officially formed with real oversight powers, a direct result of the public outcry after Jaylen's case. Some officers grumbled about the reforms, but others quietly welcomed them. "It's about time," one younger officer whispered to his partner. "We can't keep pretending this stuff doesn't happen." As for Reynolds, his days were now filled with the grim reality of incarceration. He wasn't treated as a hero behind bars. He was just another inmate, stripped of the status he once clung to. Nights were the hardest, staring at the ceiling of his cell, replaying the moment Olivia's calm voice cut through his arrogance. Across the city, the community held a vigil on the courthouse steps, not just for Jaylen, but for all the names that never made the headlines. People held candles, sang softly, and shared their own stories of fear and resilience. Olivia and Jaylen stood quietly among them. A woman approached with tears in her eyes. "My son went through the same thing years ago," she said. "No one believed him. But because of you two, maybe next time, people will." Olivia nodded, her voice soft. "That's why we have to keep pushing. One case isn't enough. We have to make sure the system changes for everyone." Jaylen looked around at the crowd. So many people, all connected by the same hope for something better. For the first time since that night, he felt less alone. As the vigil ended, Olivia wrapped an arm around her son. "This isn't the end," she whispered. "It's the beginning of something bigger." Across town, Reynolds sat in the cold stillness of his cell. The echo of Olivia's words from court haunted him. "You hurt more than just my son. You broke the trust you were sworn to protect." And he finally understood that losing his badge was only part of the punishment. The real punishment was living with the truth everyone now knew. Because truth, once revealed, doesn't fade. It lingers, shaping everything in its wake. Weeks passed, but the impact of Jaylen's case continued to ripple through the city. Community meetings became a regular occurrence, and for the first time in years, city officials actually showed up to listen. New policies were being drafted, and civil rights groups pushed harder than ever for deeper reforms. At one such meeting, Olivia sat quietly in the back with Jaylen. She watched as residents, many of whom had never spoken publicly before, stood to share their stories. A father described how his son had been wrongfully stopped and frisked. A young woman spoke about her fear of walking home at night. Jaylen leaned toward his mom and whispered, "So many people. This happened to all of them too?" Olivia nodded softly. "Yes, that's why your voice matters. It's helping them speak up too." Meanwhile, the new Civilian Review Board began investigating other complaints that had been ignored for years. For some officers, it was uncomfortable, but for the honest ones, it was a relief. The culture was shifting, slowly but undeniably. At the precinct, one younger officer looked up from his desk and muttered to his partner, "You know, it shouldn't have taken a case like Jaylen's to make us do this." His partner sighed. "No, but at least it's happening now. Maybe this time it'll stick." Back at home, Jaylen was slowly finding ways to heal. Therapy sessions helped him release the fear he'd been carrying, and he even returned to basketball practice. But the experience had changed him. One afternoon after practice, a teammate ran up to him. "Hey, I saw you on the news. What happened to you was messed up, but you're like inspiring to people, man." Jaylen blinked, unsure what to say. "I didn't do anything special. I just got through it." "Yeah," his friend said, "but you didn't stay quiet. That's what makes it matter." Meanwhile, Reynolds' life continued to unravel behind bars. He received letters from the department confirming he was permanently barred from any future law enforcement work. His family rarely visited. The men he once looked down on now treated him with the same cold indifference he had shown others. At night, in the silence of his cell, he replayed the courtroom in his mind. The calm way Olivia had spoken, the quiet determination in Jaylen's eyes, even as he sat bruised and scared. Reynolds realized too late that power wasn't in the badge he once wore. It was in the truth he'd tried to bury. Across the city, Olivia was invited to speak at a youth mentorship event. She stood before a group of teenagers, Jaylen sitting in the front row. "You might feel small in the face of injustice," she told them, "but never underestimate the power of standing up. Sometimes you won't even have to raise your voice. Sometimes simply refusing to stay silent is enough to change everything." Afterward, a girl approached her timidly. "My brother went through something like what happened to Jaylen. We didn't think anyone would care, but now I feel like maybe we can do something." Olivia smiled gently. "You can, and you're not alone anymore." Later that evening, Jaylen and Olivia walked home together. The city lights glowed softly above them. "Mom," Jaylen said quietly, "do you think this will really change things?" Olivia wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "Change is slow, but every time the truth comes out, it pushes us a little closer. And what happened to you, it's already making a difference." As they turned the corner toward their home, Jaylen felt a small but growing sense of hope. And somewhere across town, Reynolds sat in his cell, staring at nothing. The noise of the prison echoed faintly, but all he could hear was the voice of the woman who had calmly dismantled his life. Because once the truth is spoken, it doesn't just echo, it reshapes the world around it. The weeks turned into months, and while the initial media frenzy faded, the reforms it sparked continued to grow. Other cities took notice of what had happened in their community: the oversight board, the stricter policies, the way residents had united after Jaylen's case. It became a model for how to respond when trust between law enforcement and the public was broken. Olivia, though still busy with her work at the Bureau, dedicated part of her time to speaking at forums across the state. She didn't talk about her son as a victim, but as a survivor whose experience revealed what countless families had endured in silence. At one packed auditorium, she told the crowd, "My son didn't ask to be a symbol. He was just trying to walk home. But what happened to him woke people up. And if his story can prevent even one more child from facing the same thing, then it has meaning beyond the pain." Jaylen sat quietly in the audience. He was still healing, but he no longer carried the same fear in his eyes. After the event, a few other teens approached him. "You're really brave," one of them said softly. "I went through something like that last year. I didn't tell anyone. Seeing you makes me want to speak up." Jaylen didn't know how to respond at first. "I didn't feel brave when it happened," he admitted. "I was just scared. But now, I'm glad I didn't stay silent." Meanwhile, Reynolds' sentence played out quietly. In prison, he was just another name, another inmate with a disgraced past. Letters from his attorney detailed civil suits being filed by other victims from his record, people who now had the courage to come forward because Jaylen's case had exposed his pattern. At night, Reynolds lay awake in his cell, haunted by the realization that one moment of unchecked prejudice had set off a chain reaction that destroyed everything he thought made him powerful. And worse, it uncovered the harm he had caused long before Jaylen. Across the city, the police department underwent a visible cultural shift. Officers were required to wear body cams at all times, and the new Civilian Oversight Board was already reviewing fresh complaints. For the first time, families who had been ignored were getting calls back, their concerns acknowledged instead of dismissed. Olivia noticed the change when she visited the precinct to review case files for the Oversight Committee. Younger officers greeted her respectfully, some even expressing support for the reforms. "It's overdue," one officer admitted quietly. "Not everyone wears this badge for the right reasons. Maybe this will finally change that." At home, Jaylen slowly regained a sense of normalcy. He went back to basketball, laughing with friends again. But he still had moments of reflection, quiet evenings where he'd sit by the window, thinking about how one encounter had changed his life forever. One evening, as the sun set, Olivia joined him. "You've come a long way," she said softly. "I'm proud of you." Jaylen nodded. "It still feels weird, like I didn't want to be known for this. I just wanted to live my life." Olivia wrapped an arm around him. "You're more than what happened to you, but you're also proof that telling the truth matters. You turned something ugly into something that helped others." Outside, the city glowed quietly under the streetlights. Change was still slow, still imperfect, but it was happening. And somewhere in a cramped prison cell, Reynolds stared at the ceiling, knowing the world he once controlled had moved on without him. The truth had outlasted him, reshaping everything he thought was untouchable. Because truth doesn't just expose lies, it rebuilds what they tried to destroy. Months later, the city no longer felt quite the same. The courthouse, once a place people approached with fear or distrust, had become a hub for community meetings and workshops. Murals honoring resilience and justice were painted on nearby walls. And in the center of it all, Jaylen's story was still quietly present, not as a headline anymore, but as a reminder of why these changes began. Jaylen himself was slowly rediscovering who he was beyond the incident. He returned to his basketball team full-time, focusing on school and hobbies again. But every now and then, a stranger would approach him, recognizing his face from the news. "You're Jaylen Carter, right?" they'd say softly. "I just wanted to thank you. Because of you, people are finally listening." It felt strange, being thanked for something he never asked for, but it also gave him a sense of purpose. Olivia, meanwhile, kept working quietly behind the scenes. She joined a task force that focused on preventing racial bias in policing, sharing insights from her unique perspective as both a federal agent and a mother who had watched her son endure injustice. At one meeting with city officials, she spoke firmly, "Policies alone aren't enough. We need to change the culture. Training, oversight, and accountability must go hand in hand, or we'll be back here in another year having the same conversation." Her words carried weight, not just because of her position, but because everyone in the room knew what she had lived through. Meanwhile, Reynolds faded deeper into obscurity. From prison, he received notice of multiple lawsuits being filed against him. Former victims now felt empowered to speak up, and their stories were eerily similar to Jaylen's. Each one chipped away at whatever remnants of denial he held onto. For the first time in his life, Reynolds was forced to see himself clearly, not as a protector, but as the very thing people feared. Back in the community, schools began hosting workshops on knowing your rights during police encounters. Jaylen was invited to speak at one, but he hesitated. "I'm not a speaker," he told his mom. "What if I mess up?" Olivia smiled. "Just tell the truth, Jay. That's all anyone needs to hear." So, he stood in the auditorium in front of rows of students his age and younger. His voice was quiet at first, but grew steadier as he spoke. "I was scared," he admitted. "I thought no one would believe me. But my mom, she stood up for me. And people listened. So if something happens to you, don't stay silent. You deserve to be heard." The students applauded softly, some wiping away tears. Jaylen stepped down from the stage, feeling lighter, like a piece of the weight he'd been carrying had finally lifted. Meanwhile, Olivia continued to push for systemic changes. She met with lawmakers, helped design new community policing standards, and made sure Reynolds' design would never be forgotten. That night, as Jaylen and Olivia sat together on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below, Jaylen asked, "Do you think what happened to me really made a difference?" Olivia placed an arm around him. "Yes," she said simply, "because it's not just your story anymore. It's part of a bigger one that's making things better for people you'll never even meet." Across the city, Reynolds sat silently in his cell, staring at the peeling paint on the wall. The world outside was moving forward without him, reshaping itself because of the very truth he'd tried to suppress. And as the night settled over the city, one thing was clear. Truth, once spoken, doesn't just echo. It creates waves that can't be stopped. By the time spring arrived, the changes in the city were undeniable. New community programs were running. Officers were attending bias and de-escalation training. And the oversight board was actively reviewing cases that would have once been ignored. The story of Jaylen Carter had transformed from a single incident into a catalyst for wider reform. At school, Jaylen felt like he was finally reclaiming his life. Basketball season was in full swing again, and for the first time since the incident, he laughed freely with his teammates. The fear that had once shadowed him was fading, replaced by quiet resilience. But every now and then, reminders of what had happened would surface. During a game, he overheard two parents in the stands whispering, "That's the boy from the news." Jaylen glanced at his mom, sitting in the bleachers. Olivia gave him an encouraging nod. He breathed deeply, refocused, and went back to playing. Later that evening, after the game, a teammate's parent approached him. "I want you to know," she said gently, "what you went through made a lot of us think about how we treat kids in this community. You're stronger than you know." Jaylen smiled faintly. "Thanks." Meanwhile, Olivia's work gained more recognition. She was invited to speak on a national panel about law enforcement accountability, but she kept her message grounded. "This isn't about my title or my son's story alone," she told the audience. "It's about changing a culture that allows prejudice to hide behind a badge. We can't keep waiting for the next tragedy before we act." Her words resonated far beyond the room. Articles about the panel circulated online, and people from across the country reached out, saying her fight had inspired them to challenge injustices in their own communities. Back in prison, Reynolds's world had grown unbearably small. His name was now associated with disgrace. His case cited in training manuals as an example of what not to do. He rarely spoke to anyone. Letters from old friends stopped coming entirely. One day, while cleaning the prison yard, another inmate muttered under his breath, "You're the cop who got taken down by an FBI agent's kid, huh?" Reynolds didn't respond. He just kept sweeping, realizing how far he'd fallen. The authority he once abused was gone forever, leaving only shame. Across town, the precinct looked different too. Younger officers openly supported the new reforms. Body cam footage was checked daily, and civilian complaints were treated seriously. The old ways of protecting misconduct were slowly disappearing. At a town hall, a community leader stood up and said, "We're not afraid to speak anymore. What happened to Jaylen showed us that silence only helps the wrong people." Jaylen, who attended the meeting quietly with Olivia, listened as others shared their experiences. For the first time, he saw how his story had become more than his own pain. It was giving others the courage to demand better. After the meeting, a little boy walked up to him and said, "You're really brave. My mom says because of you, things are changing." Jaylen knelt down, unsure what to say. "I didn't feel brave," he admitted. "But sometimes, you don't have to feel brave to do something that matters." That night, back at home, Jaylen sat on the balcony with Olivia. The city skyline glowed softly in the distance. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think I'm starting to understand what happened to me. It wasn't just about me. It made other people speak up." Olivia smiled gently. Heckly! Your voice helped others find theirs. That's how change begins. Meanwhile, Reynolds lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, knowing the world outside was moving forward without him. Because when the truth takes root, it doesn't just change one life, it reshapes an entire community. Summer crept into the city, bringing warmer days and a softer rhythm to the streets. By now, Jaylen had begun to truly reclaim his sense of self. The nightmares that once kept him awake came less often. He laughed more with his friends, practiced basketball with renewed energy, and even started focusing on college plans. But the impact of his story hadn't faded. Community leaders continued to reference his case as a reminder of why reforms were necessary. Jaylen's name, once tied to pain, now carried a quiet strength. One afternoon, Olivia drove him to a youth mentorship event at a local community center. As they walked in, they were greeted by dozens of teens and parents who wanted to meet them. A mother approached first, holding the hand of her young son. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't know how much hope you gave us. My boy's been stopped before, for no reason. I was always afraid it would end badly. But now, I feel like we have a voice." Jaylen smiled shyly, unsure how to respond. Olivia placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You see," she whispered, "your story is helping more people than you realize." Inside the auditorium, Olivia spoke to the gathered families. She didn't dramatize what happened. Instead, she focused on what came after. "Justice isn't about erasing what happened," she said calmly. "It's about making sure it doesn't happen again. And that requires all of us, parents, officers, community members, to stay engaged, to keep demanding better." The room nodded in agreement. Afterward, several teens approached Jaylen, asking how he had managed to stay strong. "I wasn't strong at first," Jaylen admitted. "I was scared, but my mom believed in me, and then other people believed too. That's what made it easier." Meanwhile, across town, Reynolds's reality had grown bleak. He spent his days in routine silence, his cell a reminder of how far he'd fallen. Word had spread that more victims were coming forward with old complaints from his record, strengthening lawsuits that would follow him even after his sentence. One afternoon in the prison yard, another inmate mocked him. "You were the cop who thought you'd never get caught, huh?" Reynolds didn't answer. There was nothing left to defend. He simply lowered his gaze, knowing the truth had stripped him of everything. Back at the precinct, the changes were visible. Officers were required to attend monthly community meetings. The oversight board was no longer just a title. It had teeth. And in the training academy, recruits now studied Jaylen's case as an example of how quickly bias could ruin a life and a career. "This is why integrity matters," the instructor told the new officers. "One lie, one abuse of power, and you lose everything, not just your badge, but the trust of an entire city." At home that evening, Olivia sat with Jaylen on the balcony as the sun set. The city was quiet, the air warm. "Do you feel like things are really changing?" Jaylen asked softly. "They are," Olivia replied. "Not all at once, but piece by piece. You started something that won't stop here." Jaylen thought for a moment. "I didn't mean to start anything." Olivia smiled gently. "Sometimes You don't choose to start the change. It chooses you. What matters is what you do with it. Across the city, a mural was being painted on a community center wall. It showed a young boy holding a basketball, standing tall with his head high. Beneath it were the words, "Truth is stronger than fear." And in a small, dim prison cell, Reynolds stared blankly at the wall, knowing the world outside was moving forward while he was left behind. Because once the truth is set free, it doesn't wait for anyone to catch up. It simply keeps pushing forward. By late summer, Jaylen found himself stepping into a role he never expected, his voice becoming part of the larger conversation about change. At first, he resisted. He didn't want to relive the worst day of his life over and over. But slowly, he realized that telling his story wasn't just reopening wounds, it was helping others heal their own. He spoke for the first time at a small youth forum. His hands shook slightly as he held the microphone, but when he looked at the faces staring back, kids just like him, parents who feared for their children, something shifted inside him. "I didn't want to be here," Jaylen admitted. "I just wanted to walk home that night. I wanted a normal life. But when something wrong happens to you, you have a choice. You can stay silent, or you can make sure people know the truth. I didn't feel brave, but I spoke up. And now we're here, together, making sure it doesn't happen again." The room erupted in quiet applause. Afterward, a boy about his age approached. "I went through something like that," he said softly. "I didn't think anyone would care. But hearing you, I think I can tell my story now too." Jaylen smiled faintly. "You should. No one can ignore the truth forever." Meanwhile, Olivia continued her advocacy work, but she remained measured. She didn't want her son's trauma to become a spectacle. Instead, she used it as a bridge, connecting families to resources, pushing officials to pass meaningful reforms. At a city council meeting, she spoke firmly. "This isn't about one bad officer. It's about a culture that lets bias fester unchecked. You can't train away prejudice without real accountability. You have to change the system itself." Her words were echoed beyond their city. Neighboring towns reached out for guidance, asking how to create similar oversight programs. National organizations began citing Jaylen's case in discussions about police reform. And yet, while the world moved forward, Reynolds remained trapped in a cycle of regret. In prison, he was just another name on a list of disgraced former officers. Other inmates mocked him. Guards treated him with the same detached indifference he had once shown to the people he policed. He received a letter one day, another lawsuit filed by a man he'd wrongfully arrested years before. Jaylen's case had cracked open the door, and now all his past actions were flooding into the light. Across the city, the precinct was almost unrecognizable. New recruits were taught about transparency and community trust. Older officers who resisted the changes were being reassigned or quietly leaving. "This is the new standard," the chief told his staff. "The old way is gone. You either adapt or you don't belong here." One afternoon, Olivia and Jaylen walked past the community center where a mural now stood completed. It depicted a young boy standing strong with the words, "Truth breaks silence." Jaylen stopped, staring at it. "Is that supposed to be me?" he asked softly. Olivia smiled. Maybe. Or maybe it's every kid who's ever been in your shoes. They stood there for a moment, taking in the quiet power of the image. Later that evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker, Jaylen asked, "Do you think people will forget?" "No," Olivia said firmly, "because what happened to you didn't just change us. It changed everyone who saw it. And that kind of truth doesn't fade." Meanwhile, Reynolds lay awake in his cell, the sounds of the prison echoing around him. He couldn't escape the memory of Olivia's calm voice in court or the way Jaylen had stood, bruised but unbroken. Because when truth is finally spoken, it doesn't just end a lie. It erases the power of the one who told it. Autumn settled over the city, bringing cooler evenings and a calmer pace. By now, Jaylen had grown more comfortable in his own skin again. He was no longer just the boy from the video. He was a student, an athlete, and slowly, someone who could speak about what happened without feeling the same heavy knot in his chest. His school invited him to speak at an assembly about resilience. He hesitated at first, but agreed. Standing on the stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, he felt his heart pound. "I didn't think this would ever happen to me," he began softly. "I thought if I just followed the rules, I'd be safe. But that night taught me something important. Sometimes, doing everything right still isn't enough. And that's why we need each other. To speak up, to protect one another, to demand better." When he stepped off the stage, the applause wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was warm, sincere. Students and teachers alike thanked him quietly, some with tears in their eyes. Meanwhile, Olivia continued her work relentlessly. She was invited to speak at a statewide conference on police accountability. There, she met families from other cities, parents who had lost children, communities still fighting for justice that never came. Standing before them, she said, "We shouldn't have to wait for tragedy to make change. My son survived, but many don't. We need laws that don't just react to injustice, but prevent it." Her words were quoted in newspapers across the state, adding momentum to new legislation aimed at improving oversight and transparency in law enforcement. Back at the precinct, the culture continued to shift. Officers who clung to old attitudes were leaving, replaced by younger recruits who saw policing as service, not control. The Civilian Oversight Board now had the authority to fire officers who violated public trust. And Reynolds, he was simply fading from memory. In prison, his world had shrunk to a routine of silence. The lawsuits piled up. Each one reminded him that Jaylen's case had pulled the thread on a tapestry of his misconduct, unraveling everything. One evening in the prison yard, another inmate said, "You used to be a cop, huh? Must have thought you were untouchable." Reynolds didn't reply. He just stared at the ground, feeling the weight of his own downfall. Meanwhile, Jaylen found healing in unexpected ways. He started helping younger kids at the community center, teaching them basketball and talking to them about staying confident despite fear. One little boy asked, "Were you scared that night?" Jaylen knelt down and nodded. "Yeah, I was really scared, but I wasn't alone, and neither are you." Those simple words resonated more than he expected. The boy smiled, feeling reassured. Later that week, Olivia and Jaylen attended the unveiling of a new city initiative, expanded youth programs, and mandatory officer community engagement sessions. As the mayor spoke about the reforms, Olivia watched quietly, knowing this was just the beginning. After the ceremony, a community leader approached her. Because of you and Jaylen, this city is finally waking up. You turned pain into progress. Olivia simply replied, "We turn truth into action. That's what really matters." That night, as they drove home, Jaylen looked out the car window at the glowing city skyline. "Mom," he said softly, "I think I'm starting to feel normal again, but different too, like stronger." Olivia smiled. "That's what healing feels like. You're not the same, but you're better, stronger, wiser." And somewhere miles away, in a cold prison cell, Reynolds lay awake, knowing the world had moved forward without him, rebuilding itself with the truth he could no longer deny. Because once the truth is free, it doesn't just change one moment, it reshapes the future. Winter came, and with it, the city felt quieter but more aware. The reforms born from Jaylen's story were no longer just headlines. They were reality. Statewide, new policies were being introduced. Cities nearby had begun adopting similar oversight boards and stricter protocols for police conduct. What started with one boy's walk home had rippled far beyond their neighborhood. Jaylen's life, too, was moving forward. He was accepted into a youth leadership program and began speaking to small groups of students about resilience and community. Each time, he was careful not to make it about being a victim. "I'm not here to scare you," he told one group. "I'm here to tell you that your voice matters. Don't let anyone take that away from you." After the session, a teacher pulled Olivia aside. "He's making a difference," she said. "These kids see someone their age standing up and surviving something hard. It gives them hope." Meanwhile, Olivia was recognized by a national civil rights organization for her advocacy. She attended a quiet ceremony, accepting the award not for herself, but for every parent who had fought in silence. "I don't stand here as someone special," she said to the audience. "I stand here as a mother. Any parent would do what I did, but we shouldn't have to fight this hard for justice to work." Across town, the precinct had transformed. Body cam policies were now strictly enforced. With footage reviewed monthly, officers were required to spend time in community centers and schools, engaging with residents in non-enforcement roles. There were fewer complaints, fewer confrontations. Trust was slowly being rebuilt brick by brick. And yet, while the city was healing, Reynolds was all but forgotten. In prison, he was a shadow of the man he used to be. The bravado that once defined him was gone, replaced with a hollow silence. Occasionally, he'd overhear guards or inmates talking about new laws named after cases like Jaylen's. Each time, it felt like another reminder of how his downfall had sparked something bigger than himself. At night, he stared at the cracked ceiling of his cell and replayed the moment Olivia had stood in court, calm and unyielding. He realized that was the moment his power had ended, not because she yelled, but because she didn't have to. The truth alone had undone him. Meanwhile, Jaylen began to find peace in small ways. He spent more time with friends, laughed more freely, and felt the lingering weight of fear slowly lifting. One evening, after basketball practice, he sat with his mom at their favorite cafe. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think I'm okay now. Like, I can finally breathe again." Olivia smiled, relief softening her features. "That's all I want for you, to be free, not just on the outside, but in here." She gently touched his chest. Jaylen nodded. And maybe I want to help other kids. Like talk to them about their rights. Tell them what I went through, so they know they're not alone. Olivia's eyes glistened. You already are, Jay. You've been helping since the day you told your story. That same night, a new mural was unveiled on the courthouse steps. It depicted a young boy holding a light in the darkness, surrounded by the words, "Courage is telling the truth, even when your voice shakes." Jaylen and Olivia stood quietly before it, hand in hand, watching as community members gathered to admire the art. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everyone who'd been silenced and everyone who'd finally spoken up. And far away, Reynolds sat in his cell, realizing that while his name had been erased from the city's risk, Jaylen's had become a symbol of change. Because truth doesn't just end in justice. It builds a future where it has less room to grow. Spring returned, and with it came a sense of renewal. The city had moved past the chaos of protests and headlines, but the lessons from Jaylen's case remained embedded in its streets, its policies, and its people. What had once been a painful moment of injustice had grown into a lasting movement for change. Jaylen was thriving in ways he never imagined. He balanced school, basketball, and community work, often volunteering at youth centers. He never saw himself as a hero, just someone who survived and wanted to help others do the same. One afternoon, he stood in front of a group of middle school kids, holding a basketball under his arm. "I'm not here to tell you everything's perfect now," he said honestly, "but I'm here to tell you that if something wrong happens, don't stay quiet. Find someone who will listen. There are people who will fight for you." Afterward, a shy boy raised his hand and asked, "Did it ever stop being scary?" Jaylen paused, then smiled gently. "Yeah. One day it stopped controlling me. And you'll get there too." Meanwhile, Olivia's work had expanded beyond their city. She was now consulting with other towns and even neighboring states, helping them create policies that would prevent what happened to Jaylen from happening again. She traveled quietly, avoiding the spotlight, always reminding people, "This isn't about my title. It's about every family who deserves safety and respect." Back at the precinct, the changes continued. The Civilian Oversight Board was fully operational, and complaints that would have once been dismissed were now taken seriously. Officers who resisted the new culture had left, while younger ones embraced it, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. And Reynolds, he was now a forgotten name. His prison sentence passed slowly, marked by routine and regret. He received no visitors. Letters from his family stopped coming. On the outside, no one spoke of him, except as a cautionary tale in training manuals and reform meetings. In the prison library, Reynolds occasionally came across articles about the reforms sparked by Jaylen's case. The words were bitter reminders that the world outside had moved on and improved without him. Meanwhile, in the city, life blossomed again. The mural on the courthouse steps became a landmark. Tourists took photos of it, and locals brought their children to explain what it meant. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "In honor of those who spoke the truth when silence was easier." One evening, Olivia and Jaylen visited the mural. They stood together quietly, watching as families passed by, some pausing to read the plaque. Jaylen turned to his mom. "Do you think this will really last?" The changes, I mean. Olivia placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Yes, because it's bigger than us now. It's in the community. It's in the laws.